The roof gave way just after dawn, not with a dramatic crash, but with the tired inward sigh of a thing that had held too long. A strip of cedar shingles slid across the porch and landed beside the wash bucket. Dust drifted through the kitchen ceiling in a thin gray curtain. Maribel stood beneath it with one hand on the brass key she carried everywhere, listening to the house settle around her. Then a man's boots sounded on the front walk. He did not call out. He climbed the porch steps, looked once at the broken ridge and said, "I fixed the old farmhouse roof." She quietly opened the door to my future. He said it as though reporting weather. Mara opened the door. She did not yet know what future he meant. Elias Mercer was 34, born near Pueblo, raised where a man learned the value of a fence post by how long it stayed upright. He had spent 6 years moving between ranches from Durango to the San Juan Range, taking wages in winter and meals in summer. 3 months earlier, his younger brother Thomas had died of pneumonia in a boarding room at Silverton. Elias had been there when the fever took him. Since then, he had carried a small brass button from Thomas's coat in his pocket, rubbing its edge whenever the world asked him to choose a direction. Mara was 31 and had owned the farmhouse for 2 years, since her husband Owen died beneath a wagon tongue in a spring flood. She had 27 acres, 11 milk cows, 1 old mule, 3 hens, and a roof that had become a question. Mara had hired Elias for 3 days. That was all the arrangement said. He would mend the ridge, replace the rotten rafters, and leave before the first snow. She would pay him $12 from the coffee tin behind the flour bin. He noticed the tin because he noticed everything that could fail. He noticed the north wall leaning a 1/4 inch, the water stain above the bedroom, and the way Mara kept her left shoulder stiff when she lifted the bucket. He did not ask. Questions were often a way of making another person carry your curiosity. Elias set his tool roll on the porch and looked at the roof again. "I fixed the old farmhouse roof." She quietly opened the door to my future, he said once more, this time with a trace of humor. Mara's mouth moved but did not become a smile. "You haven't fixed it yet," she answered. "No," he said, "but I know where to begin." He began with the ladder. The old one had a split-side rail and leaned against the porch as if it expected forgiveness. Elias cut a length of ash from the woodpile, scarfed it into the break, and bolted it with 2 carriage bolts he had brought from his saddlebag. He did the repair before breakfast without being asked. Mara watched from the kitchen window while she kneaded bread. She had spent 2 years watching men make promises and 1 year learning that promises were cheaper than nails. The repaired ladder held his weight without complaint. He climbed. At the ridge, a gust came down from the mountains and shoved his coat flat against his back. He lowered himself, drove the first new nail, and did not look toward the window. By noon, Elias had uncovered 4 rotten rafters. The damage reached farther than the missing shingles. Water had entered in the winter, frozen, expanded, and waited. Mara climbed halfway up the ladder with a basket of nails. She had a practical face when frightened, and fear had made her practical for a long time. "You can stop," she said. "I can find someone else for the rest." Elias took the basket. "Someone else will find the same roof." "That is not what I meant." He looked down at her. His gray-blue eyes were steady, not gentle exactly, but careful. "I know." The words sat between them. Below, the mule pulled at its tether. Above, the clouds gathered over the San Juan Range like a hand closing. The first storm arrived 2 nights early. It came out of the west at 4 in the afternoon, carrying hail that struck the porch boards like thrown beans. Elias had covered half the roof with tarred canvas. The other half remained open to the sky. Mara was in the barn when the mule kicked through its stall gate. The animal had caught a hind leg in the loose chain and was thrashing against the wall. Elias heard the noise from the roof. He dropped his hammer, slid down the wet slope, and ran through the rain. He spoke low to the mule, wrapped his coat around the animal's head, and cut the chain with a cold chisel. The mule went still. Elias worked the trapped leg free, then braced the swollen joint with 2 fence slats and a strip of leather. He did not ask Mara where the splints were. He had already found them, Mara came into the barn carrying a lantern and found Elias kneeling in straw, his shirt dark with rain, one hand resting on the mule's neck. "That leg will hold if he does not walk on it tonight," he said. "The roof?" she asked. "The roof can wait an hour." It was the first time she had seen him place an animal before a building. Changed the shape of him. Owen had been kind in public and impatient in private. He had kissed her forehead before church and forgotten the broken latch for 3 months. Elias did not look like Owen. That was not the reason Mara kept looking. She looked because the mule's breathing had slowed, and because Elias stayed until it did. The storm passed before midnight. In the morning, the cottonwoods were stripped of yellow leaves, and the roof had lost another dozen shingles. Elias stood in the yard with his hands on his hips. Mara brought him coffee. He drank it without sugar. "You can go," she said. "The $12 are yours for what you did." "I did not finish. You saved the mule. The mule belongs to you. So does the roof." He looked at the farmhouse. "Then I suppose I am still working." The answer was plain. It made something in her chest move, though she had no name for it. She handed him the cup again after he finished. He accepted it. That was how trust began there, not with a promise, but with a repaired thing accepting weight. They worked for 9 days. Elias replaced the rafters with cottonwood beams he selected from the far side of the creek. He measured each one twice, because the old house had settled and straight lines had become a matter of opinion. Mara sorted the usable shingles from the ruined ones and carried them in a basket. She discovered that he hummed when concentrating, always the same 4 notes, a fragment of a hymn Thomas had liked. He discovered that she counted under her breath whenever she was angry. Neither mentioned the discoveries. The days compressed into labor. Dawn smoke, hammer strikes, bread cooling on the sill, boots crossing the yard, dusk settling blue against the peaks. In the evenings, they sat on opposite ends of the porch. Sometimes silence was the only honest work left. On the 10th day, Elias repaired the kitchen window. He did it after Mara had gone to town for lamp oil. The frame had warped so that the eastern shutter would not open. He planed the swollen wood, replaced a rusted hinge, and set a narrow wedge beneath the sill. When Mara returned, morning light entered the kitchen in a clean, pale rectangle. Her dead husband's ledger lay on the table, its pages illuminated. She stopped in the doorway. Elias was outside cutting kindling. "You fixed the window," she said. "It was stuck." "I know. Why did you not tell me?" He lifted one shoulder. "You would have thanked me." "I might have. That is why." She looked at the square of light, then at his back. Some people repaired things to be seen repairing them. Elias repaired things so the people inside could see. Mara's grief lived in objects. Owen's blue mug had a crack near the handle. His gloves hung from a peg by the back door, though the fingers had stiffened with 2 winters of disuse. In the barn, a brass buckle from his harness rested in a coffee tin. She did not worship these things. She simply had not learned where else to put the past. Elias never moved them. He asked before touching anything that had belonged to Owen, even when the question was inconvenient. Once, he reached for the cracked mug, saw Mara's face, and withdrew his hand. The small act stayed with her longer than a compliment would have. Grief does not leave because someone kind enters the room. It only becomes less alone. At the end of September, Silas Vane came from Durango with a contract folded inside his coat. He did not ride like a thief or speak like a bully. He tied his horse at the fence, removed his gloves, and waited until Mara invited him onto the porch. He represented the Dry Creek Cattle Company, which owned the adjoining 40 acres. A survey said Mara's southern fence stood 6 feet over the boundary. Silas offered her $80 to move it. "Fair price," he said. "Better than a dispute." Mara took the paper. Elias stood by the woodpile, splitting cedar. The axe rose and fell. "The fence has been there since before Owen," Mara said. "The records disagree." Silas folded his gloves. Records are what keep neighbors from deciding ownership by memory. He was reasonable. That made him harder to hate. After Silas left, Mara walked the southern boundary alone. The fence followed the creek for 140 yards, crossing a patch of ground where spring water made the grass dark. Owen had built the first section with his own hands. Elias followed at a distance until she stopped. "You do not have to come," she said. "I know. Then why are you here?" "Because you stopped." She touched a post. The wood was soft under her fingers. "If I sign, the company gets the lower pasture." "Yes. And if I do not, they take me to court." "Probably. You make that sound simple."
No.
"I make it sound measurable." He knelt and pressed his thumb into the rotten post. "This one will fail before winter." She heard the warning beneath the statement. The fence was not merely a boundary. It was the place where all her postponed decisions had gathered. Elias spent the next week rebuilding the lower fence, not because Mara had agreed with him, but because the cows needed a safe line before the snow. He used stone braces at the creek crossing and set the posts deeper than the old ones. The work was hard and wet. Twice he fell into the mud. Once he split his palm and wrapped it in a flour cloth without breaking stride. Mara brought him soup at noon and found him sitting beside the post he had just set, breathing through the pain. "You are allowed to stop," she said. "I know. You keep saying that. It keeps being true." She sat beside him. Neither touched the other. The creek ran over stones between them. A boundary can be a line, can also be a place where two people learn not to cross too quickly. In October, the town chorus began. June Alvarez at the Mercantile saw Mara buy a second pair of work gloves. Amos Pike, the blacksmith, noticed Elias ordering a hinge instead of a horseshoe. Mrs. Bellwether, who had outlived 2 husbands and trusted neither, said the farmhouse roof had become the most discussed structure in La Plata County. They were not cruel. They were simply observant, and observation became entertainment when winter approached. "You know he is staying for more than shingles," June said. Mara counted coins. "He is staying because the roof is unfinished." "Roofs do not look at women that way," June replied. Mara dropped a penny. Amos, from behind the counter, said, "Some roofs do." The town laughed. Mara did not. But that night, she found herself listening for Elias's 4 humming notes. Elias had a rival of his own, though he did not call him that. Nathaniel Reed was a schoolteacher from Pueblo who had written Mara 3 letters during the summer. He was educated, polite, and never arrived with mud on his cuffs. In November, he came to the farmhouse carrying a new geography book and a proposal spoken carefully enough to sound like a business arrangement. He would move west, teach at the county school, and help manage the acreage. "You deserve stability," he said. Mara looked at his clean gloves. "Doi." Nathaniel's face tightened, but he did not become angry. "I am not asking you to choose today. I am asking you not to confuse hardship with devotion." Elias heard the last sentence from the shed. He kept working on the broken hay rake. Jealousy was a hot thing. He had no wish to give it the dignity of speech. That evening, Mara found Elias in the tack room, repairing the leather strap on Owen's old harness. He had removed the brass buckle from the coffee tin and polished it with saddle soap. His hands moved slowly. "You should have asked," she said. He set the buckle down. "I should have. Why did you touch it?" The strap was about to tear. She looked at the worn leather, at the buckle that had traveled through 2 winters of grief. "It belonged to him." "I know. You cannot make it yours." "I am not trying to." He pushed the harness toward her. "I thought the mule could use it. If you want it put away, I will put it away." Mara pressed her thumb against the buckle. The metal was warm from his hand. This was his 3rd kind of labor. Not exertion, not domestic repair, but care offered to a memory without demanding ownership. She began to cry quietly. Elias looked at the wall until she finished. The next Tuesday, he did not come to the porch. Mara noticed because Elias came every Tuesday, whether the roof needed him or not. She found him at the creek with blood on his sleeve. Silas Vane had brought 2 survey men to mark the disputed line. One of them had driven an iron stake through the rebuilt fence. Elias had pulled it free. Silas stood with his papers in hand. No one is trying to harm you, he said. The company is protecting its interest. Elias tied a strip of cloth around his arm. A stake through a fence is not protection. Silas looked toward Mara. You still have time to accept the offer. She wanted to speak, but fear made the old practical part of her reach for the paper. $80 could buy feed. $80 could buy time. Could not buy back the lower pasture once it was gone. That night snow came early. The farmhouse filled with the smell of wet wool and wood smoke. Mara placed Nathaniel's letter beside the lamp. Elias sat at the table with a tin basin, washing blood from his sleeve. He is right about one thing, Elias said. Who? The schoolteacher. Hardship is not proof of devotion. Mara watched the water turn pink. You heard him. I hear more than people think. And what do you think hardship proves? Elias wrung out the cloth. Nothing. A person can suffer for the wrong reason. Then why stay? He looked at her. Because the roof is not the reason anymore. The room became very still. He did not explain. He did not need to. The hardest truths sometimes arrive without a speech to carry them. They did not speak of love. They spoke of lumber prices, feed, the November snow, and whether the mule's leg had healed. Elias accepted a winter position at the ranch north of Durango and told Mara he would leave after the boundary hearing. Mara said she understood. She did not. She spent 3 days moving through the house with a strange carefulness, as if the floorboards might remember him after he was gone. She washed his cup. She found the 4 notes of his hymn in the quiet places between chores. On the 4th day, she went into the attic and discovered a folded letter Owen had written but never sent. It was not romantic. It was an apology for leaving a gate unrepaired. Mara read it twice and put it back. The past had not become wiser. It had only become more honest. The county hearing was held at the edge of Mara's property because the surveyor wanted the boundary visible. Snow lay in the shadows, while the creek ran black beneath a skin of ice. Silas brought the company deed, the survey map, and one witness who had not seen the original fence built. Mara brought Owen's ledger, the tax receipts, and Elias's measured notes. Nathaniel came too, standing back beneath a cottonwood. The town chorus gathered at a respectful distance. No one wore a weapon openly. The argument would be made with paper and memory, and that was enough. Silas read the clause describing the southern parcel. His voice was calm. The company is not seeking to take what is yours. We are seeking to correct what was recorded incorrectly. That is how taking sounds when it wears a clean coat, Amos Pike muttered. Mara stepped to the fence line. Elias stood on the other side, one hand resting on the new post. The creek divided them by 12 feet of frozen ground. You told me hardship is not devotion, she said to Elias, loud enough for the gathered people to hear. It is not, he answered. Then what is? His gaze did not leave hers. Choosing the work after you know it will be hard. Silas cleared his throat. Mrs. Bell, this is not a court for private declarations. No, she said. It is a boundary. That is what makes it honest. She held up Owen's tax receipts. The dates showed payment on the full acreage for 11 years. The surveyor's own field notes showed the creek had shifted 20 feet during the flood that killed Owen. The original line had followed the water, not the company map. The evidence was plain. The decision was not. Silas read the notes. His jaw worked once. The company can challenge this, he said. You can, Mara replied. Will you? He looked at the lower pasture, at the fence Elias had rebuilt, at the mule standing behind it. If I do, the company spends 3 months in court and you spend 3 months afraid. That is not a fair bargain. He turned to his surveyor. Withdraw the stake. The surveyor hesitated. Silas's voice sharpened for the first time. I said withdraw it. Then he faced Mara. I still believe the offer was in your best interest. I know, she said. That is why it frightened me. Silas accepted the answer without apology. His concession cost him a commission and a measure of authority. He folded the map, put on his gloves, and left with his dignity intact. Some men lose by learning the shape of another person's courage. Nathaniel found Mara after the hearing near the cottonwood. I will return to Pueblo, he said. The school here has no opening yet. You could stay until spring. I could. He looked toward Elias, who was replacing the iron stake hole with packed stone. But I would become a man waiting for you to forget someone else. That is not fair to either of us. Mara felt gratitude, and something like grief for the life that would not happen. You were kind, she said. I was careful, Nathaniel answered. There is a difference. He handed her the geography book. Keep it. You may want to know what lies beyond the county line. Then he walked toward town. His exit had friction. He had wanted her. He had also wanted to leave without making her smaller. Mara watched until his dark coat joined the gray of the street. Elias worked until sunset to finish the boundary. He drove the last post with 3 measured blows. Mara stood beside the creek, holding the brass buckle from Owen's harness in her palm. I fixed the old farmhouse roof, he said. The sentence sounded different now. You fixed more than that. Not alone. You did not ask me to help. You carried the shingles. That is not what I mean. He set the hammer down. The mountains turned copper behind him. Mara, I am leaving for the North Ranch in 6 days. If you want me to stay, say so because you want me here, not because the roof still needs work. She looked at the fence, the creek, and the house with its new eastern light. What if I want you here and I am afraid? Then say both. Fear had governed her for 2 years. It did not deserve another winter. She crossed the boundary. Not quickly. Not as a declaration made for witnesses. She stepped over the lowest rail and stopped in front of him. I am afraid, she said. I am afraid you will die like Owen. I am afraid I will need you and become someone who cannot stand alone. I am afraid the house will be full of your things and then empty again. Elias listened. His face remained restrained, but his thumb found the brass button in his pocket. Thomas died in Silverton, he said. I was there. I kept telling him he would wake when the snow stopped. He did not. Since then, I have believed staying was a kind of promise I could not keep. Mara reached for his hand. His palm was rough beneath hers. You do not have to promise forever today, she said. No, he answered. But I can promise tomorrow. The town gathering took place 3 nights later in the church basement. June brought coffee, Amos brought a pie, and Mrs. Bellwether brought an opinion she did not share until everyone had eaten. Mara wore her navy bonnet and a high-necked gray dress. Elias wore the only clean shirt he owned. The town chorus watched them arrive separately and sit together. No one applauded. That would have made the choice too easy. During supper, Silas Vane appeared at the door to say the company had accepted the boundary correction. He did not approach Mara. He only nodded once to Elias. Then he left. The gesture was small, but it closed the public part of the matter. The private part remained. Mara found Elias outside after the gathering, at the north fence where the ground rose toward the road. The moon made the snow blue. You are leaving in 3 days, she said. Yes. And you fixed the roof. Yes. And the window. Yes. And Owen's harness. He looked down. That one may have been presumptuous. It was not. She held out the brass buckle. Take it. He did not. It belongs to you. It belongs to the work of keeping something useful. She closed his fingers around it. Then keep it until I ask for it back. He breathed once, slowly. Mara. She stepped closer. I fixed the old farmhouse roof. She quietly opened the door to my future. This time the words were his, but the future was hers to answer. She touched his cheek. You fixed the roof, she said. I am opening the door. They married in April beside the creek, when the cottonwoods were showing their first green. There was no grand announcement. June sewed the button on Elias's clean shirt. Amos repaired the church door. Mrs. Bellwether stood in the back and cried into a handkerchief she pretended was for dust. The farmhouse roof held through the spring rain. The kitchen window opened toward the east. Mara kept Owen's gloves in the same place, not because she was trapped by them, but because the house had room for memory now. Elias kept Thomas's brass button beside the lamp. He did not rub it as often. Some griefs are not solved. They are given a chair and taught to sit quietly. In the first summer, Elias built a covered rack for Mara's flour sacks so mice could not reach them. Mara planted beans along the southern fence. In the second, they added 6 acres of pasture and repaired the creek bridge with river stone. Their work made no music anyone in town could hear. It made a life. On Tuesdays, Elias still came to the porch with coffee even when he had slept in the room beside hers. The ritual had begun as employment and become a kind of blessing. Once, during a September sunset, Mara asked him why he still said the old sentence whenever he finished a repair. He looked at the roof, the fence, and the eastern window. "Because it remains true," he said. "I fixed the old farmhouse roof. She quietly opened the door to my future." Mara laughed then, a quiet laugh, but it reached the barn. Years later, when the house had a second porch and the mule had become an old gray shadow, a young ranch hand arrived from Pueblo looking for work. He had a torn coat and an expression that tried to look harder than he felt. Elias gave him the broken gate before he gave him supper. Mara gave him supper before she asked his name. They had learned that belonging was not a speech a person received. It was a sequence of small permissions. Use the good hammer, sit near the stove, leave your boots by the door, come back tomorrow. The young man repaired the gate badly. Elias showed him how to reset the hinge. Mara watched from the window where the eastern light fell across the table. A house becomes a home, one useful kindness at a time. The story of the roof traveled farther than Mara expected. It reached Durango, then a ranch above Silverton, then a woman in Pueblo who had lost her husband and believed she had missed her last chance at being chosen. People changed the details. They said Elias had rebuilt the whole farmhouse in one night. They said Mara had opened the door before he touched the first shingle. Neither was true. The truth was quieter. He had shown up for a damaged thing. She had learned to let him stay. Neither miracle nor rescue had been required. The work had simply continued until the people doing it could no longer pretend it meant nothing. If you are listening from a place where the house feels too quiet, perhaps you know the fear Mara carried. Perhaps you have mistaken being self-sufficient for being safe, or mistook grand promises for proof. A person can love you loudly and still leave the gate broken. Another can say very little and remember which hinge catches in cold weather. Look for the work that remains after the words have gone. Look for the hand that repairs without keeping score. Being chosen does not mean becoming helpless. It means finding someone willing to stand beside your strength. On the 1st September after their 10th anniversary, Mara and Elias stood at the southern fence while the mountains gathered gold. The creek had moved again, a narrow change that would have mattered to a surveyor and hardly at all to a person carrying a bucket. Elias rested his hand on the post. Mara rested hers over it. They looked toward the farmhouse, its roof dark against the light, its eastern window bright. "I fixed the old farmhouse roof. She quietly opened the door to my future," Elias said. Mara answered, "And you kept walking through it." The line had started as a joke, then become a confession, then become a record of work. Now it was simply true. Some doors open softly because they have been repaired first. That evening they sat on the porch. The San Juan range faded from copper to violet. A cow called once from the lower pasture, and the sound traveled along the rebuilt fence. Elias adjusted his hat. Mara rubbed the brass key at her waist, though the door had not been locked against him for years. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke for a while. The house held the sound of their breathing, the settling beams, the faint creak below. Love had not arrived as a storm. It had arrived as a ladder made safe, a window facing east, a harness returned to usefulness, and a boundary crossed by choice. That is what love looks like when it has learned to work. And if another farmhouse waits beneath a failing roof, another widow listens for boots on a porch, another quiet man carries a grief he cannot name, then perhaps their story is already beginning. Somewhere beyond Durango, a rancher is about to repair a gate for a woman who believes no one notices the cold in her kitchen, and she will answer him with a door no map can mark. Until next time, keep riding. The practical details mattered because affection without detail could become another kind of weather. Mara knew the price of flour, the number of nails in a coffee can, and exactly how many hours remained before a storm. Elias learned these numbers without making a display of learning them. He counted boards, measured hinges, and listened for the change in a cow's breathing. Their intimacy grew inside arithmetic. $12 became a roof. 27 acres became a question of belonging. 6 feet of disputed grass became the place where a woman decided her own life could still expand. At breakfast, Mara sometimes found Elias had already brought in the wood. He never arranged the pieces neatly. He stacked them by length, the short pieces nearest the stove. She began leaving an extra biscuit beside his plate. He pretended not to notice for 3 mornings. On the 4th, he said the biscuits were good. "They are the same as before," she told him. "No," he said. "They are beside my plate now." It was not a declaration. It was a change in geography. Some feelings announced themselves by moving an object 6 inches closer. The winter gave them long hours indoors. Snow covered the road to town for 11 days, and the farmhouse became its own small country. Elias repaired a chair leg with a dowel. Mara mended his coat by the lamp. They spoke about the places they had been and avoided the places they feared returning to. Once he mentioned Thomas and stopped. Mara did not press. She placed another log on the fire. The silence was not empty. It carried the names they could not yet say without losing their breath. When the roof finally met the weather, Elias climbed to the ridge during a hard March rain to inspect the flashing. Mara stood below with an umbrella that turned inside out. He climbed down laughing, the first unguarded sound she had heard from him. "What?" she asked. "You look angry at the sky. The sky has earned it." He took the umbrella, turned it right side out and handed it back. The rain softened. A person can be known through the way they fight weather, but also through the way they return an umbrella. Mara kept the boundary documents in a drawer beneath the blue mug. She read them when uncertainty returned. Not because paper could make her brave, but because evidence could remind her that fear was not the same as fact. Elias never told her what decision to make. He sharpened the pencil, cleaned the lamp chimney, and waited. His patience was not passive. It was a form of respect with its sleeves rolled up. The first time Mara said his name in anger, it was because he had worked through a fever. She found him in the shed with a blanket around his shoulders and took the hammer from his hand. "You are not useful if you collapse," she said. Elias looked offended. "I was not collapsing. You were leaning against a post with your eyes closed. The post was there." She made him sit near the stove. He obeyed after a pause long enough to preserve his dignity. That evening she learned that care could move in both directions without becoming debt. And if another farmhouse waits beneath a failing roof, another widow listens for boots on a porch, another quiet man carries a grief he cannot name, then perhaps their story is already beginning. Somewhere beyond Durango, a rancher is about to repair a gate for a woman who believes no one notices the cold in her kitchen, and she will answer him with a door no map can mark. Until next time, keep riding.